Today in round 3 of Norway Chess we saw the battle of the Scandies. Magnus Carlsen from Norway, of course, against Niels Grandelius from Sweden. Carlsen was, of course, hoping to win this game. He was playing with the white pieces, and Grandelius is rated quite a bit below Carlsen. He's actually just outside the world's top 100, so Carlsen had to target him. e4 today. No messing about with fianchettos. Sicilian from Grandelius. He plays several different systems, plays e5, different variations of the Sicilian. And now, little bit of a surprise. Grandelius played quite an offbeat move. Knight f6. This is the so-called Nimzowitsch variation. First played by Aaron Nimzowitsch in 1911. I've been doing my homework. And it's very much in the hypermodern mould, part of the hypermodern movement, rather related to the Alekin's defence, of course. But actually this was played even before Alekin played his new move in the 1920s, and Nimzowitsch had some decent results with this. Grandelius has played this a couple of times in the last year or so. In fact, against Hari Krishna. So this shouldn't have come as a surprise to Carlsen, but in fact, Carlsen said after the game that he wasn't really anticipating this. But Grandelius plays lots of different things. Anyway, Carlsen pushed on. Seems like the most normal move. And now we can see that speaking of the Alekin's defence, obviously it's related, but I would say this is a slightly improved version from Black's viewpoint, because at least you have this pawn contesting the centre, so White can't build up this centre very easily. But White, to some extent, does have a kind of free hand here. d4 is a common continuation, and this is very much like a c3 Sicilian. Where you haven't played c3 basically, so to some extent White has gained time. That's a reasonable way to play. Carlsen played instead knight c3, also an excellent continuation. And in the past, I seem to remember this was one of the main lines, probably rather dubious for Black. Sometimes it's involved some kind of pawn sacrifice, but should be better for White. But, well, Grandelius took on c3, which is sort of normal continuation. Well, yeah, as I said, I've been doing my homework, and I saw that Alekin faced this opening with White way back in the 1920s, and he took back with the b pawn and went for a big centre, but somehow this isn't quite as convincing. Looks like a winnower, or Winnower, as wie man auf Deutsch sagt, where Black hasn't actually given up the two bishops, and he took here, and well, structurally this isn't so clever for White. Well, it's playable, but that's another story. Carlsen prefers to recapture with the d pawn, and I think this is a much nicer move, because it just gives White very free development. Maybe the bishop goes to d3, sometimes c4. Easy development for White, and it's not so easy for Black to break out while this pawn is on e5. So this is a very standard recipe against this system, actually. And bishop f4 just overprotects the e-pawn. And now a kind of normal continuation would be to play e6. And then, well, you can see how things might develop. White often goes for a queenside castling, and then doubles on the d-file, and you can see that this pawn really cramps Black, and White just has a kind of positional advantage here. It's a very pleasant position, nice space, very free movement for the pieces. But Grandelius tried to cut across this idea by playing queen b6. Now, he clearly prepared this, and it has been seen in a few games. So what's the big idea? Well, clearly the queen is hitting b2, and it's an ugly move. It's not helping Black's development. But the idea is that if white plays, for example, b3, stopping the queen's capture of the pawn, then the queen goes back. But now black has something to bite on the queen side. So, for example, if the king castles queen side, now this was, for example, played in a rapid play game between Bologan and Rachmanov, Khanty-Mansiysk 2013, and with the pawn on b3, this is, well, it's very, very double-edged, but black certainly has counterplay on the queen side here. So this is the idea. And if rook b1, then obviously white is unable to castle queenside, so not so good. So, well, Carlsen thought for about 10 minutes here and played queen c1. I think, well, we'll see, it's a clever move, because white still has the possibility sometimes to castle on the queen side, but it can be a useful move protecting that bishop, and the queen might move out here, and you can still castle queenside. Now, this has been played before, h6, and after h4, then black broke out with d5. This has been played by Ipatov. But this gives white very easy development, and then castles kingside. I mean, that's playable for black, but it's not really what black has in mind in this system. Grandelius thought for half an hour and played f6 here, and this is a very principled move, really. You could say that, well, what's black's advantage here? His advantage is, structurally, that he has an extra pawn in the centre of the board. Now, this has been played before. Now, let me show you how this can turn in black's favour. In this game, this was a game played in Germany, and two German players, and white played bishop g3. Black exchanged everything on e5 and then forced the queens off with this move. And now we can see that in this case, well, once that pawn on e5 has disappeared, black has nice centre pawns. Actually, he can develop pretty easily. Bishop might come to c6. This is absolutely fine. Centre pawns are very strong. I mean, white is okay there as well, but black, absolutely no problem. So this is white's dilemma. Now, I guess you could exchange here, and this is also a little bit double-edged, but Carlsen, after 8 minutes thought, played bishop c4. Very, very interesting move. Now, you can see that exchanging on e5 won't give black what he wants because the e6 square is covered, so he can't trade off. I guess you could play something like e6, but then white castles, and, well, you have to ask yourself, what exactly is that queen doing on b6? You know, black needs to be able to play b6 and bishop b7 very quickly to get counterplay, but doesn't look very good. So Grandelius played g5. Well, it's the most uncompromising move. Basically, black just wants to win the e-pawn. Whoops, the e-pawn. So the bishop on f4 came back, and now g4. Now, if the knight moves, then black takes on e5. No good. But now we can see Carlsen's idea. He took on f6. Now, clearly, if that's recaptured, then, well, black has just wrecked his pawn structure totally, and I mean that's just crushing for white already. These pieces are wonderful, and black's king is terrible. So black, after this move, black has to take the knight on f3. So Carlsen sacked piece. Great fun. Okay, how does he get compensation? When I was watching the game, I thought, well, maybe he's just going to castle here, and after the pawn takes here, then rook e1. This also gives white some compensation, actually. But Carlsen's move actually was just on the money. Queen f4. This is a brilliant move. Brilliant move. Well, let's look at something obvious first of all. What about queen takes pawn? This meets an unfortunate end. f7 check. And queen c7 mate, that's the first point of queen f4. So, very tricky position already. Okay, well, Grandelius throws in pawn takes pawn and attacks the rook. Fine. So at least white can't castle kingside. Right, well, how exactly is black going to develop here? Well, what about e6? Well, this loses straight away to f7 and a queen f6 check, and we'll snaffle the rook. What about d6? Another normal move, trying to bring some pieces into the game. Well, then castles queenside. We can see that this idea with queen c1 has really paid off, and I mean black's pieces just look amazing there. Okay, so already a very difficult position. Grandelius improvises. He plays knight a5. Now this looks really bizarre. Why has he done this? Well, he's opening up the third rank for the queen. So this forces white's hand actually, because black is threatening queen takes pawn. So f7 check and king d8. The knight would like to take the bishop, but that just slips out of the way. Bishop d5. Still can't take on b2 because of queen c7 mate. Really bizarre position. But if black makes normal moves, let's say d6, then white is just going to castle queenside and then take on g2. And the problem is black's pieces are so gummed up here that it's really not possible to prevent something like bishop h4 and rook g8. Black really can't move anything at all. Excuse me a second. So Grandelius had a bit of a think here and came up with bishop h6. Then queen e5, hitting the rook. Still can't play queen f6 because of queen c7 mate. Rook f8. Simple move, bishop h4, threatening to take here. So Grandelius had to give up the exchange. Well, he's bought himself a little bit of time. The knight has come back into the game. But Carlsen is the exchange up. Okay, how's he going to try and use this extra material? Well, it might be tempting just to give a check here and maybe take on h7, but then white's pieces are kind of in the four corners of the board. Carlsen's technique was brilliant here actually. Queen g3, that's such a very calm move. Instead of grabbing more material, he makes sure that black is still not going to escape easily, so the queen covers c7. Doesn't mind giving up b2 or c2 because white has maintained coordination. He plays this so responsibly. This is just beautiful. So white is so well coordinated, and it's just not possible for black to develop. Can't play d6 because of queen takes d6, and that bishop covers e4. Very nicely done. Queen f5. Black just can't develop here. Rook takes g2. Yeah, of course, and b6 would be met by bishop takes knight, of course, as well, in most positions. Bishop f4. I mean, Grandelius really is completely lost here. He might have a couple of pawns for the exchange, but he just hasn't got any development, and this is pretty easy now. So there's a pin here. Saves the piece, but I mean, isn't it fantastic how Carlsen just maintains this beautiful coordination? His pieces look so good here. Well, what happens if d6? Finally, black can play d6, but then you take here, and I mean, there are many ways to win. Bishop e6 is a good move, but rook b1 I really like. Just hitting black from another side, and if rook b8, well, we can be a little bit spectacular here and force a winning endgame. Okay, Grandelius played instead a5. Rook takes h7, so now this is really, really easy. And Carlsen even very calmly brings his king to a beautifully safe spot. well, these moves aren't too difficult, but it's very good technique. Carlsen doesn't do anything flashy, just make sure that black has zero counterplay, and now it's time to just queen that g-pawn. Doesn't need to bother with black's queenside counterplay. And in this position, Grandelius resigned. Well, let's go on a little bit further. If the king comes across, easiest thing to do is push the g-pawn, just keep going. And now bishop e4, and we'll keep pushing that g-pawn, and it's going to go through. Black will have to give up another piece to stop the g-pawn. Absolutely brilliant from Magnus. I think he showed great understanding of what black was trying to achieve with this curious move queen b6, and then, well, great vision in seeing this piece sacrifice, and understanding that, well, black really couldn't escape from his difficulties. Absolutely brilliant.